am so happy to bring you today's card. My son is joining me, and this card is in part his design. And I am using the Hero Arts, what month is this? The March month kit. And if you've not heard about their monthly kits, you should hop over to their site and check them out. March's kit was ocean themed, and I bought the packet, which is $35 set. And the inks I'm using here to ink the back of this card came in that kit, as well as a die cut set and a stamp set. And then they have some coordinating add-on sets as well. And the stamps that we'll be using today are a couple of the coordinating sets. I don't usually go out and buy so many items for one thing, but my boys are into the ocean theme right now and have been for a couple of years. And so I knew this was a set that I could use again and again. So for inking the back of this card, I'm using the 2 ink cubes that came in this set, and they are water reactive cubes. So I'm thinking they're kind of like a distress ink, but don't quote me on that for sure. And I'm just using my blending tool and trying to blend the bluer shade and the turquoise shade as smoothly together as possible. And I'm doing this on a craft mat, and so I wanted to make sure I wiped off my craft mat so that I wasn't getting any ink on the back of my card. And now my son is using the embossing budding, and we are rubbing the card down really well. I think that this is a wetter ink, and we want to make sure that when we emboss, none of the powder sticks to the ink itself. Now this stamp is the Hero Arts Bubble Bold Print, and I covered the middle of it with Versamark ink, and we've laid the card on top, and we're rubbing it all over to make sure we get the entire impression of the bubbles. And you can't really see it on the card yet, but it's there. And then I also splurged and bought the embossing powder that went along with this set. It is called Sparkling Sea, and let me tell you, it sparkles. I had no idea until I opened up and dumped the powder out how much glitter was in it. But it's really pretty. This is also a chunkier powder, which I've never used a thick one like this. I usually use really fine embossing powders. So it'll be fun to see how it turns out when we heat it up. Now, because I was trying to emboss the entire surface of the card, I found it was really hard not to accidentally brush the powder off of the corners and edges. So if you ever try this, just know you'll need to be a little extra careful to get full coverage. And the powder melted beautifully as I embossed it. And the chunkier powder did leave a nice texture when it was done. Also, the glitter, I was afraid would continue to be messy because of how fine it was, but it did melt into the embossing nicely. And I don't think it's going to fall off at all. It seems to have all stuck to the surface of the card, which is really nice. I'm one of those people who really doesn't like to get glitter all over the place. And then now we're taking a water brush, and we are just wetting the insides of some of the bubbles. And my son is he's telling me which bubbles he wants me to color. He has a lot of opinion about it. I thought that was kind of fun. And so we're just picking randomly what he liked best to color in. And as this dries, those areas are actually going to lighten up a little bit. The water will react with the ink and cause it to push to the sides, and this will create a darker ring around the edge of the bubble, and then the center will become lighter, and it will almost give them more of a 3D effect. Now we are picking out which fish we want to put on the front of our card. We are using the Pet Goldfish Stamp Set, and the fish my son picked, I am inking with Memento black ink, and we're going to color these in with alcohol markers. The paper I'm using is 110-pound Neenah cardstock, and I just recently got to buy some of this because I finally used up my old Georgia Pacific cardstock. And this is the silkiest, smoothest cardstock I've ever touched. And the alcohol markers blend absolutely beautifully on it. So even though it's a little bit expensive, I highly recommend it. Now I'm going to be a little bit mean, and I'm not going to tell you exactly which colors of alcohol markers I'm using. The brand that I own is the Spectrum Noir markers. And for these goldfish, I'm using a darker shade of orange and a kind of a medium shade of orange, a brighter orange, and a yellow. And this is something that you can do with any brand of alcohol marker you own. And so it doesn't matter what the shades are. Pick the shades that you like and that work best for you. A second ago, you saw my son pointing at one of the other fish. He didn't like the color of it. He thought it was too orange, and he wanted me to add a little bit of the yellow to it. And so I did, and it lightened it down a little bit, which is kind of fun. And he's giving me little comments here about where to touch up or not. And then since I'm cutting this out, I'm going to fussy cut these, and I want to have a small, thin white border around the edge. I'm using my blending tool, my blender marker, to kind of erase or push back the ink from the edges. And then this seaweed is from the exact same Goldfish set, and the sentiment we're using is from the Hero Arts March kit. For the colors that I'm going to use for this seaweed, my son actually pulled out one of his favorite ocean books and showed me one of the coral reef pages, and he asked me to match the colors in that picture as closely as I could. So we pulled out my color swatch and we picked the ones that we liked the best. And on my own, I wouldn't have thought to use as bright of greens that I'm using. You'll see that I'm using a really dark green and then a kind of a brighter alpine type shade, and then a really pale green that's also, it's pale, but it's also still a bright color. And these mixed really nicely together and made such a fun dimensional look that I wouldn't have expected. And so it was really fun having somebody else's opinion to move me outside of my normal color bubble. While I'm coloring, I thought I'd let you know that I sped this video up, the vast majority of it at least, to be 4 times the speed of real time. This was a super fun card, but it was a little bit more complicated than some of the ones I've done before. And with having a 5-year-old helping and commenting and giving their own ideas as well, it slowed us down a little bit. And so this card took about an hour and a half to make in all, and it was totally worth it and a lot of fun. But if you only have a couple of minutes to make a card, one like this probably isn't the best choice. I am now using my blending marker again, and I'm pushing back the green. I was having a little bit of trouble with my lighter green marker. The bullet tip seemed to be a little bit drier, and so I used my chisel tip, and because of how thin the edges of the seaweed are, I got a lot of light green outside the edges, so I had a little bit more color to push back than normal. I'm also not quite as good at coloring under the camera because the angles just aren't right to be able to see as well as I usually do. And I'm fussy cutting the seaweed, and I'm showing you here how I went around one of them, but everything I cut out for the card, the fish and the seaweed, this is exactly what I did, and you don't need to see all of that. So now we're at the point where we are going to place all of the objects on our card. And I'm sorry, I need to apologize that it's out of focus right now. I changed the focus on my camera when I was cutting so you could see it better. And I had it on manual focus for some reason and I forgot to take it back. But in a couple of minutes, it will come clear again. And the cardstock I'm using for this card is a thick Neenah cardstock. It's the 80-pound weight. I did score it with my paper cutter, and when I folded it, I smushed it down with my finger, but I didn't pull out my bone folder, and so I didn't get a good tight crease, and the card kept wanting to pop open on us. So I finally took it away for a minute and creased that down tight, and after using the bone folder on it, it stayed closed just fine. And then for our sentiment, we decided we wanted to add some of the blue ink to the back of it so that would blend a little more of our background. And I stuck the sentiment to a piece of tape. And this is something that I first heard about. I believe it was in one of Jennifer McGuire's videos. And it was such a great idea because then it holds the paper still and you can cover it edge to edge and your fingers aren't in the way. Anyway, it was just such a great tip. And after inking it, I'm cleaning up my craft mat again. And we're going to figure out where we want to put all of these items. I'm going to make a couple of the seaweed 3D with dimensionals, and then the fish, I think we'll glue a couple to the card and have one of them 3D as well. I will throw in that I've discovered that when using alcohol markers, I really like to color on top of a craft mat because the alcohol markers leak through the paper, and so you really want to put, always actually, to put something underneath them that's important so that you don't stain your working surface. But I've found with the craft mat, when the ink sinks through, it floats on the mat and then immediately dries up back into the paper. And so it doesn't dye the craft mat, and you're not having to waste any paper or anything like that as a bleed sheet. So all this time I've been blabbering on about craft sheets. My son and I have been trying to pick where to put the pictures on our card, the fish and the seaweeds. He wanted to pick and I wanted him to pick, but it was taking him a while to decide how he wanted everything. And so we messed around a little bit, especially with our sentiment piece. And this bottom fish, it was such a cute idea. He wanted it to be swimming down. He said he wants it to look like it's going to be hiding or about to go and hide behind the seaweed. And so we glued that one flat underneath one of the dimensional seaweeds. And I think that's my favorite fish on the card. It just turned out so cute doing it that way. And after a little back and forth again on our sentiment, we finally decided where we wanted it to go, and we put the last touch on the front of our card. My favorite thing about this card is how much depth it ended up having to it. Between the kind of marbled effect we got when inking the background, the reactive ink with the water on it for the bubbles, and then the glitter and texture from the embossing, while the card is simple, there's a lot going on, and in person it just is even more gorgeous than it is in video. I wish I could show it to you better. Well, I had a blast designing this card for my son, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And thanks for watching.